Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're going to continue on today in Unit 7 with cities and urban land use. In our previous videos we were looking at the origin and evolution of cities, and today what we're going to be looking at a little bit is urban systems and industrialization and the city structure. So really what we're kind of looking at is the progression of urbanization and some important points in urban history that we can point to and things that are going to cause urbanization to occur. And then, of course, we're going to at the end we're going to be looking at some of the impacts of urbanization. So, first of all, one of the things that we begin to notice in our world today is that the world is becoming increasingly urban, and that's really an important key point because with urbanization, there's a tremendous amount of development and improvement that has to take place within society, not just individuals with a lot of times the technology and the infrastructure that's necessary in order to support the population that's coming to live in the urban area. And so it's going to be really important when we talk about some of the changes that are taking place in that particular society that's becoming increasingly urban. Of course, when we look at the urban versus the rural populations of our world, historically we have been a rural world, most of the population living out in rural areas, acting as agriculturalists, interacting with the city on kind of an intermittent basis. Sorry about that. Not all that frequently. A lot of it had to do with insufficient transportation, things along those lines. Just no need to go into the city. But what we saw and what we've seen really throughout the course of the Industrial Revolution begins to change all of that. So you see some of the years here in 1800. About 5% of the world is considered urban, whereas 95% of the world is considered rural. 1950, 16% of the world is considered urban, whereas I guess that'd be 84% of the world is considered rural. In 2000, we got to the point where we were about 50-50, and it was just a couple of years ago. So about 2013, if I remember correctly, kind of in that area, we just passed the milestone where the world is 51% urban and 49% rural. Now, interesting thing with the United States, it makes us a little bit different from a lot of the other countries, and we're actually kind of going backwards, where people are becoming more suburban, people moving out of the urban cores and into to adjacent suburban areas. But just like we talked about in some of our previous videos, at least this is according to the man who worked for the Census Bureau that I talked to, there's really no differentiation between the urban, or really they don't know how to differentiate between the urban and the suburban settings, and so I guess they're all considered kind of part of a similar or common system. And there's a graph down here that illustrates kind of this point. You look at the rural populations, and of course, as society develops, as economies develop, you're going to see an increasing decline in rural populations because people are going to need to interact with the cities. People are a lot of times, rural people, agriculturists want to improve their life, and so that's why a lot of them move to the cities. And just in general, if you talk about people in more developed countries, reasons why they go to the city, they talk about kind of the attraction and the allure of the city. I apologize for that. And so you see this increasing tick upward. And a lot of people, when they advocate for sustainable development, they talk about our need to live in more, not necessarily confined spaces, but definitely talk about improving density when it comes to the amount of space that each of us takes up. So they want us to live in more dense spaces, which is why they're creating things like urban growth boundaries, which we discussed very briefly in one of our previous units. So when we're looking at the difference between more developed countries and less developed countries, just kind of in general, more developed countries tend to be more urban. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that more developed countries have the greater capacity to handle more urban populations. They have greater infrastructure that allows for urban populations to exist there and exist there in a way that is not just people are scraping by, but something that's conducive to the actual living arrangement, whether it happens to be the health or whether it happens to be the services that are provided in that city, things like that. But not only that, the jobs to sustain the people that are in those urban populations. So these statistics are a little bit old, several years, based on the resources I was looking at when I put together these PowerPoints. But in the United States, somewhere around 8% of the population is considered urban, whereas in Africa, now of course we're talking about the entire continent of Africa, not just there is no country of Africa, so hopefully there's no confusion there. with about 35% of the population considered urban. Now we look here. This is off the United Nations. This is the United Nations demographic that's put together. Actually, it's a brief, not necessarily a video, but just kind of a brief series of um, maps that are put together, proportional symbol maps that show the populations of countries that are considered urban. I think interesting is something that's interesting. If you look at this, obviously the different shapes of the bubbles indicate total population size, but if you look over here in your key, talking about percentage of the population that's considered urban. Even though we see China over here, with 1.038 billion people being considered urban, India with 875 million people considered being urban by the year 2050, according to UNICEF, it's still not even greater than 75% of the population, where with the United States, 165 million people, according to this, in 2050, still is greater than 75% of the population. So still even China and India would have a ways to go in regards to having a greater proportion of their population being urban. So, of course, when we talk about when we talk about urbanization, one of the things that's going to drive industrialization, one of the things that's going to drive urbanization is going to be industrialization. And we saw this massive move of people to the cities with the Industrial Revolution. Not only did you have the provision of jobs as a result of the Industrial Revolution, but also, if you'll remember, industrialization mechanizes and automates a lot of processes within agriculture. So people lose their jobs in agricultural industries, and so they're looking for a way to provide for their families. So a lot of them fled into cities to look for those jobs. It's no different today. People are looking for a way to improve their position, improve the lifestyle of their family, improve the position of their children for the future. So they move to cities looking for those jobs. One common thing that happens when you have very rapid urbanization is the development of what's called a shock city. Essentially, a shock city is just a city that urbanizes so rapidly that it has a very difficult time taking on the people that move into the city, and so there's insufficient infrastructure, insufficient space, and necessary resources for the people who move into the city, and of course all the problems that are associated with that. Just an example here: Manchester, England, one of the first cities to really be hit by the Industrial Revolution. Based on the information that I had, 1750. You have about 80,000 people living in Manchester, but then by 1850 you have around 500,000 people living in the city, or what is considered the city. So obviously a very large increase, a very rapid increase in just 100 years there. So you have a picture of Manchester, England. The factories right there on the water, polluting the water and things like that. But then modern day things like the favelas outside of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And basically people are just squatters coming in and building houses that are right outside the city, and so a lot of people who live in these favelas, if we could turn the camera around, you would see, you would see Rio on the other side, and so people are living in the favelas on the outskirts of the city, so that they can then interact with that city and get jobs in that city, and so that's really the purpose of their living arrangement. And of course, this is very dangerous, very precarious. Pretty much all the services, whether it's electricity or otherwise, is going to be stolen and illegally hooked up, so it ends up being very dangerous as well. Based on all the information, I've seen very dangerous places to go because essentially they're run by drug cartels, so not a place you want to go and visit. So when we look at these shock cities, the problems that arise with these early urbanization is things that we even still see today. The development of slums, so places where housing conditions are very poor. Whether we're talking about very poor housing conditions or insufficient housing that's available for people and their families. Obviously, the large amounts of pollution, not just from the factories, but also you have to consider the people that are moving there and the amount of human waste that is created, not just bodily human waste, but also the amount of disposable waste in terms of the things that we're consuming, whether it happens to be packages or other things, the trash that we develop. So, what do you do with all of those things? The fire hazards that are developed as a result of poor housing, unsafe houses put together, whether it's talking about the factories that are put up very quickly, these are incredible fire hazards, and because proper safety precautions are not put up, large parts of the city could be destroyed relatively easily. And even with that, you think about establishing fire departments, you think about establishing police departments. Those obviously have a very hard time keeping up because of the large numbers of people that are moving into the cities very quickly. And then, of course, if we're talking about children moving into cities, because we're talking about families moving into cities. So what do you do with children? A lot of times there's insufficient schools to take in these children, or maybe schools haven't been set up at all because of this idea of education for a large portion of the population. So they go to work. Are they wandering the streets? Are they pickpockets? Do they steal? What is it that they're doing? And so you have these large numbers of children that are, if there's not sufficient infrastructure for them to keep them busy and occupied, then of course that can create a lot of trouble as well. So that's all that we have time for today. Hope that you found that helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment box below, and I'll see you next time.